A divorced mom bought a ghost town, but what her dog found there will leave you in tears. She thought she was just buying a rundown desert town for a fresh start. But when her loyal dog started digging, they uncovered something no one expected: buried dog tags, love letters, and a soldier's secret that had been hidden for decades. This wasn't just a ghost town, it was a graveyard of broken promises, lost love, and a mystery that could change everything. As she digs deeper, the past comes alive: rumors of desertion, a mother who died waiting, and a son who never knew the truth. Every discovery brings her closer to uncovering the real story, but also closer to losing everything she's fighting for. What really happened to the soldier who never came home? And will the truth finally bring peace or reopen wounds that were never meant to heal? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The old SUV's tires crunched against the gravel as Lucia Donovan steered them deeper into the New Mexico desert. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and pink, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. In the passenger seat, her teenage daughter Emily had her forehead pressed against the window, her expression a mix of disbelief and resignation. Bruno, their loyal German shepherd, sat alert in the back seat, his warm breath fogging up the window as he watched the desert roll by. "There it is," Lucia said softly, her grip tightening on the steering wheel as the first buildings of their new home came into view. Wooden structures, weathered by decades of sun and wind, stood like tired soldiers along what had once been the main street. Emily lifted her head from the window. "You can't be serious, Mom. This place looks like it's about to fall apart. It's got good bones," Lucia insisted, trying to inject enthusiasm into her voice. "And it was cheaper than any condo in the city. Way cheaper, because it's literally a ghost town," Emily muttered, slumping back in her seat. "Normal people don't buy ghost towns." Lucia pulled the SUV to a stop in what must have once been the town square. Dust billowed around them, catching the last rays of sunlight. "We're not exactly normal people anymore, sweetie." After the divorce, she let the sentence trail off, not wanting to dive into that particular wound again. Before Emily could respond, Bruno let out an excited bark and scrambled toward the car door. The moment Lucia opened it, he bounded out, tail wagging furiously, as he began exploring his new territory. "Well, at least someone's excited," Lucia said, managing a small smile. They stepped out of the car, their shoes crunching on the dusty ground. The main street stretched before them, lined with buildings that seemed frozen in time. A saloon still bore its original sign, though the letters were faded almost beyond recognition. Next to it stood a small church, its steeple listing slightly to one side but somehow still standing. The general store's windows were clouded with decades of dust, but its wooden awning remained stubbornly attached. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, though the evening wasn't particularly cold. "This feels like walking through a graveyard," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Bruno trotted back to them, his nose covered in dust but his tail still wagging. He circled around their legs before heading off to investigate another building. "It won't feel like that for long," Lucia promised, putting an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "We'll clean it up, fix what needs fixing. Make it ours." She gestured toward the largest cabin at the end of the street. "That's going to be our house. The previous owner used it as a vacation home in the 1970s, so it's in better shape than the rest." They made their way to the cabin, Emily trailing behind as Lucia unlocked the heavy door. The inside smelled of dust and old wood, but it was dry and solid. They'd brought camping supplies, knowing it would take time to make the place properly livable. Lucia set up a battery-powered lantern on what would become their dining table, currently a fold-up camping table, while Emily pulled sandwiches from their cooler. The light cast strange shadows on the walls, making the room feel both cozy and slightly mysterious. "I know this isn't what you wanted," Lucia said softly, unwrapping her sandwich. "But we needed a fresh start, Emily, something that was completely ours." Emily picked at the crust of her sandwich. "I get it. It's just different." "Really different?" "Different can be good," Lucia said, though her own voice carried a hint of uncertainty. They ate in relative silence, broken only by the sound of Bruno's paws on the wooden floor as he investigated every corner of the cabin. As they prepared for bed, spreading out sleeping bags on the floor of what would become their living room, Bruno suddenly stopped his exploration. The German shepherd's ears went rigid, his body tensing as he faced the cabin's front window. A low growl rumbled in his throat, his eyes fixed on something in the darkness outside. "What is it, boy?" Lucia asked, following his gaze. Through the window, she could just make out the collapsed entrance of the old mineshaft at the edge of town, a darker shadow against the desert night. Bruno's growl deepened, and Emily scooted closer to her mother on her sleeping bag. "Mom?" she whispered, her earlier skepticism replaced by uncertainty. "It's probably just a coyote," Lucia said, but she found herself staring at the mineshaft entrance, trying to pierce the darkness beyond it. Bruno continued to growl, his eyes never leaving that spot, as the desert night settled around their new home. Golden morning light filtered through the dusty windows of the cabin, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Lucia knelt beside their camping stove, carefully watching the battered coffee pot as it began to bubble. The familiar aroma of brewing coffee helped make the strange surroundings feel a bit more like home. A few feet away, Emily sat cross-legged on her sleeping bag, breaking pieces of beef jerky into smaller chunks. Bruno sat beside her, his tail thumping against the floor, as he waited patiently for each morsel. "You're spoiling him," Lucia said, but she couldn't help smiling at the sight. "He deserves it after protecting us all night," Emily replied, feeding Bruno another piece. The German Shepherd had finally settled down around midnight, but he'd remained alert, his eyes frequently darting to the window. Lucia poured the coffee into her metal camping mug. "Ready to explore our new kingdom in the daylight?" Emily stood, brushing jerky crumbs from her jeans. "Might as well see what we got ourselves into." They stepped outside into the crisp desert morning. The town looked different in the clear light, less threatening, though no less abandoned. The buildings stood like tired sentinels, their weather-beaten walls telling silent stories of the years they'd endured. "I'll check out the general store," Lucia said, pointing to the building with its faded signage. "Why don't you look around the schoolhouse? It's probably similar to where I'll be teaching in town." Emily nodded, already moving toward the small building with its bell tower. Bruno looked between them, seemingly torn about which human to follow, before trotting after Emily. The old schoolhouse was a single room with rows of ancient desks still bolted to the floor. Emily ran her finger along one desktop, leaving a clear trail in the dust. "Must have been weird," she mused aloud to Bruno, "having all grades in one room." The dog wagged his tail, sniffing around the teacher's desk at the front. Meanwhile, Lucia pushed open the creaky door of the general store. Bells above the entrance jangled, the sound startlingly loud in the quiet morning. Shelves lined the walls, still stocked with rusted cans and ancient boxes. She picked up one can, its label too faded to read, and wondered about the last person who'd placed it there. A sharp bark from outside pulled her attention. Through the grimy window, she saw Bruno racing toward the collapsed mineshaft, his nose to the ground. Emily followed, calling his name. "Bruno, wait." Lucia hurried outside, jogging to catch up. By the time she reached them, Bruno was already digging frantically in the loose soil near the mine's entrance, dirt flying between his legs. "He won't stop," Emily said, watching the dog with concern. "It's like he knows something's there." Lucia was about to call Bruno away when his paw struck something solid. Emily dropped to her knees beside him, carefully brushing away more dirt. "Mom, look. There's something here." Together, they cleared away more soil, revealing the corner of an old leather satchel. The leather was cracked and stiff with age, but the bag was mostly intact. With gentle hands, Lucia worked it free from its earthen grave. "Should we open it?" Emily asked, her earlier reluctance about their new home forgotten in the excitement of discovery. Lucia carefully unbuckled the satchel's tarnished clasps. Inside, they found several items. A set of military dog tags on a chain, their metal surfaces dulled by time, a small Bible, its pages yellow and brittle, and a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Emily picked up the dog tags, squinting at the embossed text. "Jack Turner," she read aloud. "There's a service number too, but it's hard to make out." Lucia gently untied the ribbon, holding the letters together. The paper was fragile, threatening to crumble at the edges. The handwriting was delicate but clear, written in faded blue ink. "They're signed by someone named Eleanor," she said, scanning the first page. "Eleanor Turner. She must have been his wife." They carried their discovery back to the cabin, where they could examine it more carefully. Lucia sat by the window, the morning light making it easier to read the delicate pages. Emily perched on her sleeping bag, hugging her knees to her chest as she listened. "My dearest Jack," Lucia began reading aloud. "Another month has passed, and still no word. The other wives tell me I should give up hope, that too much time has gone by since you were reported missing in action in Vietnam. But they don't know you like I do. They don't understand the promises we made." Emily leaned forward, caught up in the words. "She was waiting for him to come home?" Lucia nodded, carefully turning to another letter. "The town is emptying out now. The mine's nearly dry, they say. Families are moving away, seeking better fortunes elsewhere. But I'll stay. I'll keep teaching at the school as long as there are children to teach. And I'll wait for you, just like I promised." The intimacy of Eleanor's words, penned so many years ago, filled the cabin with an almost tangible emotion. These weren't just historical artifacts. They were pieces of someone's heart, someone's hope, preserved in ink and paper. As Lucia read, Bruno sat near the window, his attention fixed on the mineshaft in the distance. His posture was alert, his ears forward, as if he could sense that there was more to this story buried in the desert soil. Emily moved closer to her mother, peering at the weathered pages. "Do you think he ever came home?" Lucia touched one of the letters gently. "I don't know, sweetie, but Eleanor must have loved him very much to wait so long." Bruno let out a soft whine, still staring at the mineshaft, as if he alone knew the answer to Emily's question. The morning sun blazed through the windshield, as Lucia steered her old sport utility vehicle down the two-lane highway, leaving behind clouds of desert dust. Emily slouched in the back seat, sharing space with Bruno, who pressed his nose against the window, watching the landscape roll past. The leather satchel sat on the passenger seat beside Lucia, its presence like a silent passenger carrying decades of secrets. "Are you sure someone at the courthouse will even care about this stuff?" Emily asked, absently scratching behind Bruno's ears. "It's, like, super old. Records offices keep everything," Lucia explained, adjusting her grip on the steering wheel. "And if Jack Turner was from around here, they might know something about what happened to him." The small town of Mesa Valley appeared on the horizon, a cluster of sun-bleached buildings rising from the desert floor. Unlike their ghost town, Mesa Valley still breathed with life. Pickup trucks lined the main street, and people moved between shops despite the morning heat. The courthouse stood at the center of town, an imposing brick building with white columns. Lucia parked in the nearly empty lot, the gravel crunching under her tires. "You two stay here," she told Emily and Bruno. "I'll leave the air conditioning running." Emily rolled her eyes. "Mom, I'm 14. I want to see what they find out too." Lucia smiled, grabbing the satchel. "Okay, come on then." "But Bruno has to stay." The German Shepherd whined but settled back onto the seat as they closed the car doors. Inside the courthouse, their footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Signs pointed them toward the records office, where industrial metal shelves stretched toward the ceiling, packed with folders and boxes. An elderly clerk looked up from his desk, peering at them through thick glasses. His nameplate read, Harold Matthews. "Can I help you ladies?" he asked, his voice warm and gravelly. Lucia placed the satchel on his desk. "We've found some items in Silver Creek, the old mining town. They belonged to someone named Jack Turner. We were hoping." "Jack Turner?" The clerk's eyes widened, and he straightened in his chair. "Now there's a name I haven't heard in years." He reached for the satchel with careful hands. "Where exactly did you find this?" "Near the old mine," Emily piped up. "Our dog dug it up." Harold Matthews opened the satchel reverently, examining the dog tags and letters. Jack was a local boy, enlisted in 1968, shipped out to Vietnam. He shook his head slowly. "Never came back, listed as missing in action in 71. Lucia leaned forward. "The letters are from Eleanor Turner. Was she his wife?" "Fiancée," Harold corrected, his expression softening. "Eleanor taught at the schoolhouse in Silver Creek. Such a kind soul. She waited years for him, you know. Most folks thought Jack had deserted, run off to Canada like some others did during the war. But Eleanor," he paused, lost in memory. "She wouldn't believe it. Kept saying he'd promised to come back to her." Emily moved closer to her mother. "Did anyone ever find out what happened to him?" Harold shook his head. "Official record still lists him as MIA. Eleanor lived with the shame of it, people whispering that she'd been abandoned. She stayed in that town long after the mine dried up, teaching the few children who remained. Then one day, she just disappeared too." Lucia thought about the lonely schoolhouse, imagining Eleanor waiting there, scanning the horizon for a figure that never appeared. When was the last time anyone saw her? "Must have been 78 or 79, Harold said. "The town was almost empty by then. Someone said they'd seen lights in the church one night, but when they checked the next day, no sign of her." They spent another hour with Harold, who helped them make copies of old newspaper clippings about Jack's deployment and disappearance. The sun was setting by the time they returned to Silver Creek, casting long shadows across the empty buildings. Emily insisted on helping Lucia prepare their simple dinner, canned soup heated on the camping stove. As they ate, she kept glancing out the cabin window at the church, its weathered spires stark against the darkening sky. "Mom?" Emily's voice was unusually quiet. "I think I saw someone moving in there." Lucia lowered her soup spoon. "In the church?" "Just for a second. Like a shadow passing by the windows." Lucia grabbed her flashlight. "Stay here with Bruno. I'll check it out." But Bruno was already on his feet, following her to the door. The church stood silent, its windows dark and partially boarded up. Lucia's flashlight beam cut through the gloom as she approached, Bruno close at her heels. The church door creaked as she pushed it open. Dust motes danced in the flashlight beam. The wooden pews were still arranged in neat rows, though age had warped and split their surfaces. At the front, a simple altar stood empty, the cross above it hanging slightly crooked. Bruno sniffed along the floor but showed no signs of alarm. The church was empty, yet something about the space felt watched. Back in the cabin, Emily had spread Eleanor's letters on her sleeping bag. "Mom, listen to this part," she said as Lucia returned. "The lights in the church comfort me at night. Sometimes I imagine you're praying there, asking God to guide you home to me." Lucia sat beside her daughter, trying to shake off the unease from the empty church. They read more letters together, Eleanor's words, painting a picture of devotion that spanned years. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the ghost town's empty buildings. Later, lying in their sleeping bags, Lucia stared at the cabin ceiling, listening to Emily's steady breathing beside her. Bruno lay near the door, seemingly asleep. Suddenly, the German shepherd's head shot up. A low growl rumbled in his chest, building into furious barking as he leaped to his feet, facing the church. Emily jerked awake. "Mom?" Lucia wrapped her arms around her daughter, pulling her close. Through the cabin window, the church was a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. Bruno's barking echoed through the empty town, but beneath it, Lucia could have sworn she heard something else, the faint sound of footsteps on wooden floors, moving through a building that should have been empty. The desert sun hadn't yet cleared the horizon when Lucia woke, her mind still replaying Bruno's fierce barking from the night before. The cabin's wooden walls seemed thinner in the pale dawn light, less protective than she'd hoped. Emily was curled up in her sleeping bag, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd had as restless a night as her mother. "Rise and shine, sweetheart," Lucia said softly, touching Emily's shoulder. "We're sticking together today." Emily blinked awake, immediately glancing toward the church. "Did you hear anything else after Bruno stopped barking?" "No, but I think we'll be safer exploring as a team." Lucia pulled out their camping stove to heat water for instant coffee and oatmeal. "Besides, Bruno seems to know something we don't." As if hearing his name, the German shepherd padded over, his nails clicking against the wooden floor. His usual morning enthusiasm was tempered by an alertness that made Lucia uneasy. He kept looking toward the door, then back at them, as if eager to show them something. They ate quickly, the oatmeal barely touched. Emily stayed unusually close to her mother as they stepped out into the morning air. The ghost town looked different, in the early light, less abandoned, more like it was simply waiting. "Should we check the church again?" Emily asked, but Bruno had other ideas. He trotted purposefully toward the spot near the collapsed mineshaft where they'd found the satchel yesterday. His tail was high, his posture determined. "I guess Bruno's made our decision for us," Lucia said, following the dog. The loose soil, where they'd found the satchel, showed signs of more than just Bruno's previous digging. Something about the depression in the ground looked deliberate, almost like, "Mom," Emily whispered, "it looks like a grave." Lucia's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't wanted to voice the thought herself, but Emily was right. The rectangular depression, the careful way the earth had been mounded, it was too intentional to be natural. Bruno began digging again, more frantically than before. Lucia hesitated only a moment before pulling the folding shovel from her backpack. "Emily, honey, maybe you should wait in the cabin." "No way," Emily said firmly. "We stick together, remember." They took turns with the shovel, carefully removing layers of sun-baked soil. Bruno stayed right beside them, occasionally pawing at the dirt himself. The morning grew warmer, but neither of them suggested taking a break. About 3 feet down, the shovel struck something solid. Lucia's hands trembled as she and Emily carefully brushed away the remaining dirt. A flash of faded red and blue emerged, the corner of an American flag, preserved by the dry desert air but fragile with age. "Oh my God," Lucia breathed. They worked more slowly now, using their hands to gently clear the soil. The flag had been wrapped with careful precision around a human form. Bones showed through the deteriorated fabric in places. Emily's voice shook. Is it Jack?" As if answering her question, their careful excavation revealed a skeletal hand still clutching the Bible they'd found in the satchel. Lucia sat back on her heels, tears streaming down her face. "He made it home," she whispered. "He came back to her." Emily started crying too, her shoulders shaking. Eleanor never knew. She waited all those years, and he was right here. Bruno whined softly, pressing against Emily's side. Lucia pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and dialed 911. Within an hour, Sheriff Tom Hardy's patrol car pulled up in a cloud of dust. The sheriff was a tall man with gray at his temples and a perpetual frown. He stood over the gravesite, hands on his hips, looking more annoyed than concerned. "Look," he said, barely glancing at the carefully wrapped remains. "This is a ghost town. People died here, finding old bones. isn't exactly breaking news. But this is Jack Turner, Lucia insisted. He was listed as Mia in Vietnam. His fiancée waited years for him. This proves he wasn't a deserter. He made it back. Sheriff Hardy's frown deepened. Ma'am, that was 50 years ago. Everyone involved is long dead. What good comes from stirring up old stories now? The truth is always good. Emily spoke up, her voice stronger than Lucia expected. Eleanor deserves to have people know she was right about Jack. The sheriff shook his head. I'll call the county coroner, but don't expect much. Old bones, with no bearing on anything current, aren't exactly a priority. He turned back toward his car, then paused. And don't go spreading stories around town. People here like their peace and quiet. They watched him drive away, dust settling in his wake. Bruno growled softly, as if sharing their frustration with the sheriff's dismissal. That evening, after making sure Emily was asleep, Lucia sat at the cabin's rickety table, writing in her journal by lantern light. The warm glow barely reached the corners of the room, but it was enough to see the words flowing from her pen. Jack came home. Whatever happened in Vietnam, whatever struggles he faced, he kept his promise to Eleanor. He returned to Silver Creek, carrying his Bible and her letters. But why wasn't he able to reach her? What happened in those final moments? Eleanor deserved to know the truth, and even 50 years later, that truth matters. I have to find out, for Eleanor, for Jack, and for everyone who's ever kept faith against impossible odds. Bruno lay at her feet, occasionally twitching in his sleep. His paws moved as if he was still digging, still trying to uncover secrets buried in the desert soil. Lucia reached down to scratch behind his ears, grateful for his protective presence. Outside, the desert night was alive with whispers, and somewhere in the darkness, the old church stood, sentinel over its long-buried truths. The lantern's flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on her journal pages as Lucia continued to write, determined to piece together the story that time and indifference had tried to erase. The morning mist curled through the empty streets of Silver Creek, like ghostly fingers, softening the harsh edges of the abandoned buildings. Inside their temporary home, Lucia stirred sugar into her instant coffee, watching through the cabin's grimy window as thin ribbons of fog danced between the weathered buildings. Behind her, Emily dragged an ancient broom across the wooden floor, sending up clouds of dust that sparkled in the early sunlight streaming through the cracks in the walls. Bruno followed her progress, sneezing occasionally at the disturbed dust. Mom, this place probably hasn't been cleaned since Eleanor lived here, Emily said, pausing to wipe sweat from her forehead. Speaking of which, what's our plan for today? Lucia took a sip of her coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste. I want to head into town. There has to be more information about Jack and Eleanor somewhere. Libraries keep old newspapers, and maybe there's a historical society. Better than sweeping 50 years of dust. Emily agreed, propping the broom against the wall. Can we get real coffee while we're there? The drive into town took 20 minutes along the winding desert road. The small town of Millbrook hadn't changed much since the 1970s, its main street lined with brick buildings and faded awnings. The library occupied an old Victorian house, its wooden steps creaking under their feet as they climbed to the entrance. Inside, the air smelled of old books and furniture polish. A librarian directed them to the local history section, tucked away in a back room filled with filing cabinets and bound newspapers. They had just started pulling out folders when a sharp voice made them jump. You're the ones who bought Silver Creek, aren't you? An elderly woman stood in the doorway, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Despite her age, her eyes were bright and alert behind wire-rimmed glasses. Yes, I'm Lucia Donovan, and this is my daughter Emily, Lucia said, extending her hand. Martha Lee, the woman replied, her handshake firm. I'm the town historian, been keeping these records for 40 years now. She studied them closely. Word travels fast in small towns. Heard you found something out there. Lucia hesitated, remembering the sheriff's warning. But something in Martha's direct gaze encouraged honesty. We found Jack Turner's remains. The sheriff didn't seem interested, but we want to know more about what happened. About Eleanor. Martha's expression softened. Eleanor Turner. Now there was a woman worth remembering. She pulled up a chair. I knew her well. I was just starting out teaching when she was in her last years at the Silver Creek School. She kept teaching there, even after everyone left? Emily asked, leaning forward. Martha nodded. That schoolhouse was her life. Even when the mine closed and families moved away, she stayed. Kept that one-room school running for the handful of children still there. Said she'd promised Jack she'd keep the light burning until he came home. Lucia felt her throat tighten. What was she like? Strong, gentle, stubborn as a desert plant, Martha said, her voice warm with memory. She never believed Jack deserted, no matter what people said. Kept teaching, kept hoping. The townsfolk thought she was crazy, living out there alone, but she had such dignity about her. Martha stood and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder. "I've kept everything I could find about Silver Creek. Newspaper clippings, photographs, school records." Emily began carefully spreading the contents across the table. Suddenly, she gasped. "Mom, look at this." She held up a black and white photograph. Eleanor Turner stood on the schoolhouse steps, wearing a simple dress, her dark hair caught in the wind. But what made Lucia's breath catch was the small boy clinging to Eleanor's skirt, his face partly hidden against the fabric. "Eleanor had a child?" Lucia whispered. Martha nodded slowly. "Little James. Born about 8 months after Jack shipped out to Vietnam. Eleanor named him after Jack's father. Jack never knew he had a son." Lucia realized, her heart aching. "No," Martha confirmed. "And that's what kept Eleanor in Silver Creek more than anything. She was determined James would know his father's home, would be there when Jack returned." She sighed. "James grew up, of course. Went off to college in 1988. Eleanor finally moved into town after that, but she was never the same. They spent hours going through the records. Martha's memory was sharp, filling in details the documents couldn't provide. She remembered Eleanor's quiet grace, her dedication to her students, the way she never gave up hope, even as the years passed. As the afternoon light began to fade, they thanked Martha and gathered their copies of the most important documents. The drive back to Silver Creek was quiet, both lost in thoughts of Eleanor's long vigil. Lucia glanced over at Emily, who was studying the photograph in her lap. Eleanor's smile in the image was gentle, proud, her arm protectively around her small son. The ghost town ahead was taking on new meaning with each revelation, not just abandoned buildings, but the sight of a love story that spanned decades, of faith that never wavered, of promises kept even when it seemed impossible. The setting sun painted the desert in shades of gold and purple as they approached Silver Creek. The photograph in Emily's hands seemed to glow in the warm light. Eleanor Turner, forever captured in that moment of maternal joy, her son holding tight to her dress, neither of them knowing that Jack lay so close, yet forever out of reach. The morning sun cast long shadows across Silver Creek as Lucia and Emily stood before Eleanor's cabin. The small wooden structure leaned slightly to one side, its weathered boards bleached gray by countless desert summers. Bruno pranced ahead of them, his tail wagging with excitement as he bounded through clouds of dust. "Are you sure we should go in?" Emily asked, her voice hushed. "It feels private somehow." Lucia reached for the rusted doorknob. "Eleanor's story deserves to be known. And maybe we're meant to be the ones to tell it." The door creaked open on protesting hinges. Sunlight streamed through dirty windows, illuminating dancing dust motes. The cabin's single room felt frozen in time. A simple iron bed frame stood against one wall, its mattress long gone. A pot-bellied stove squatted in the corner, its pipe stretching up through the ceiling. Bruno sniffed his way around the perimeter while Lucia and Emily took in the scene. A rocking chair sat by the window, its wood smooth from years of use. Emily ran her fingers along the armrest. "Can't you just see her sitting here?" she whispered. "Reading, writing letters, watching for Jack." Lucia nodded, throat tight. Against the opposite wall stood a makeshift bookshelf made from wooden crates. She crossed the room and examined the volumes still lined up neatly despite the years. Most were children's books, worn copies of Tom Sawyer, Treasure Island, and dozens of others. Some had carefully printed names inside their covers. James Turner, grade 3. "Mom, look at this," Emily called. She was crouched by the rocking chair, pointing to something carved into the windowsill. When Lucia knelt beside her, she could make out the faded words. "Eleanor plus Jack, forever." "She really never stopped loving him," Emily said softly. Bruno's excited barking drew their attention. He was scratching at a corner of the room, his nose pressed to the floorboards. "Bruno, stop that," Lucia called, but then she noticed something odd about the boards he was pawing. One seemed loose, slightly raised above the others. She knelt beside Bruno, and worked her fingers under the edge of the board. It lifted easily, revealing a space beneath. "Emily, bring the flashlight," she called. In the beam of light, they could see several leather-bound books nestled in the hidden space. Lucia lifted them out carefully. They were journals, their pages yellow with age but still intact. They settled on the floor, Bruno lying between them. As Lucia opened the first journal, Eleanor's handwriting flowed across the pages in neat, careful script. "April 15th, 1968. The doctor confirmed it today. I'm carrying Jack's child. Oh, my darling, how I wish you were here to share this joy. But I'll write everything down, save every moment, so when you come home, you won't have missed a thing." For hours, they read through Eleanor's life, recorded in her own words. She wrote of her morning sickness, of feeling the baby's first kicks, of her determination to stay in Silver Creek despite her parents' pleas to move to town. She described James's birth during a winter storm, with only the midwife for company. "He has your eyes, Jack," she'd written. "When I look at him, I see you looking back at me." The journals continued through James's childhood, his first steps taken across these very floorboards. His first words, the stories she read him in the rocking chair. Every entry ended with a message to Jack, as if the journals were one long letter to her missing love. "Some folks think I'm a fool for staying," one entry read. "They say I'm wasting my life waiting, but they don't understand. My life isn't wasted. I'm teaching our son, keeping our home, holding our dreams. This isn't waiting, it's believing, and I'll believe until my last breath." Eleanor wrote of her loneliness, of nights when the desert wind howled through the cracks in the walls, and her faith felt as thin as paper. But always, she returned to hope. She described teaching James about his father, showing him Jack's letters, telling him stories of their love. The final journal entries grew shakier, the writing less steady. Eleanor mentioned headaches, dizziness, her failing eyesight. The last entry was dated just weeks before James left for college. "My dearest Jack, the doctor says there's nothing more they can do. But don't worry, I've kept my promise. I've stayed faithful. I've raised our boy to be strong and good, just like his father. He's going to make us proud at university. And I know, somehow, that you tried to come home to us. Love finds a way, even across death. Until we meet again, my love. Your Eleanor." Lucia closed the journal gently, aware of tears streaming down her face. The room felt heavy with Eleanor's presence, with the weight of her long vigil. "She died waiting, Mom," Emily whispered, her own eyes bright with tears. Bruno whined softly and scratched at the corner of the room again, his nose working insistently at the floorboards. His nails scraped against the wood, raising a hollow sound that echoed through the quiet cabin. Martha Lee's small office at the Historical Society smelled of old paper and coffee. Sunlight streamed through dusty windows, catching the silver in her hair, as she carefully turned the pages of Eleanor's journals. Lucia sat across from her desk, watching the older woman's face for reactions. "These are remarkable," Martha said finally, closing the last journal. Eleanor Turner was quite a woman. To stay in that ghost town all those years, raising her boy alone. She believed in Jack, Lucia said firmly. She knew he wouldn't abandon them. Martha's expression softened with something like pity. "Honey, you need to understand, there were rumors, whispers. Some folks said Jack Turner never intended to come back. But the skeleton we found could be anyone's remains," Martha interrupted gently. "Silver Creek saw its share of drifters and lost souls. And desertion wasn't uncommon during Vietnam. Some men just couldn't face coming home." Lucia shook her head, remembering the carefully preserved flag, the Bible clutched in those bones. "No, the way those letters were written, Jack loved her. He wouldn't just leave. Love's complicated," Martha said. "War changes people. I remember how folks talked, saying Jack had started a new life somewhere else. Eleanor's parents begged her to accept it, to move on. But she wouldn't hear it. Because she knew better," Lucia insisted. She pulled out her phone, showing Martha the email she'd received that morning. "I pushed the sheriff to run DNA tests on the remains. They're processing them now." Martha raised her eyebrows. "Tom Hardy agreed to that? He didn't have much choice." "I threatened to call the military affairs office about a possible MIA soldier's remains." Lucia managed a small smile. "He didn't like that idea." "You're as stubborn as Eleanor was," Martha observed, but there was respect in her tone. The days that followed stretched with unbearable tension. Lucia and Emily continued working on the ghost town, clearing debris, salvaging what could be saved. But their thoughts kept returning to the tests, wondering what truth they might reveal. One night, a week after submitting the remains, Emily shook Lucia awake. "Mom, Bruno's acting weird again." Lucia blinked in the darkness. "What time is it?" "Almost midnight. He was whining at the door, so I let him out. But he won't come back in. He's digging behind the church." Lucia grabbed the battery-powered lantern and followed Emily outside. The desert night was cool and clear, stars brilliant overhead. Bruno's shape was visible in the darkness, pawing frantically at the ground behind the weathered church building. "Bruno. Here, boy," Lucia called, but he only whined and dug more urgently. Emily played her flashlight beam over the disturbed earth. "There's something there, Mom. Look." In the loose dirt, something metallic gleamed. Lucia knelt beside Bruno, brushing away soil until she could grip the edge of what felt like a small tin box. It was badly rusted but still intact, about the size of a thick book. With trembling fingers, Lucia worked the lid open. Inside, protected from the elements, lay a stack of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. The top envelope was addressed in Eleanor's familiar handwriting. My Jack. Emily leaned close, shining the flashlight. They're not like the other letters. These were never mailed. Lucia carefully untied the ribbon. The letters were dated in the last months of Eleanor's life, after she'd grown too ill to walk to the post office. She'd kept writing anyway, pouring out her heart on paper, then buried the tin where she believed Jack would someday find it. My dearest Jack, Lucia read aloud, her voice catching. The doctor says I don't have much time left, but I need you to know. I never lost faith in you, not for one moment. Whatever kept you from coming home, I know it wasn't by choice. You were the most honorable man I ever knew. Emily touched her mother's arm. Mom, you're crying. So are you, Lucia said softly, wiping her eyes. They sat there in the starlight, Bruno pressed warm against them, reading Eleanor's final messages to the man she'd loved so faithfully. Each letter spoke of her unwavering belief in Jack's goodness, her pride in their son, her certainty that love endured beyond death itself. The last letter was dated just days before Eleanor passed away. Unlike the others, it was short. My love, I feel you near now, closer than ever. Perhaps that means I'll see you soon, on the other side of this life. Until then, know that I kept my promise. I stayed, I believed, I loved. Forever yours, Eleanor. Bruno nosed gently at the tin box, then looked up at Lucia with dark, knowing eyes. She scratched behind his ears, wondering how he'd known where to dig, how he seemed to understand so much about the mystery they were unraveling. We have to prove she was right about him, Emily said. The DNA results have to show something. Lucia carefully retied the ribbon around Eleanor's last letters, holding them close. We will, sweetheart. Whatever it takes, we'll uncover the truth. They walked back to their cabin through the silent ghost town, the tin box cradled in Lucia's arms like something precious. Above them, the desert stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, watching over secrets both buried and revealed. The kerosene lamp cast a warm glow across the cabin's wooden table as Lucia carefully arranged Eleanor's unsent letters. Her fingers trembled slightly as she smoothed each yellowed envelope, treating them with the reverence they deserved. Emily sat across from her, chin propped on her hands, watching intently as her mother began to read. These are different from her earlier letters, Lucia said softly. There's something more desperate in them. Listen to this one. She lifted a letter dated March 15, 1973. My darling Jack, today our son Daniel asked about you again. He's growing so tall, just like you. I told him how brave his daddy is, how you're finding your way back to us. Some folks in town whisper that I'm foolish for believing, but they don't know what I know in my heart. I feel you out there, searching for home. I'll keep the lights burning until you find us. Emily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She never stopped believing in him, did she? No, Lucia replied, selecting another letter. Look at this one from 2 months later. The mine's been closed 3 years now, and most everyone's gone. But this is where you'll look for us, so this is where we'll stay. I've been teaching Daniel his letters in the schoolhouse, just him now, since the Miller family moved away last winter. He's so bright, Jack. You'd be so proud. Bruno patted over and rested his head on Lucia's knee as she read letter after letter. Eleanor's words painted a portrait of unwavering faith, despite mounting hardship. She wrote of keeping the garden planted, of mending the cabin roof herself, of telling their son bedtime stories about his father's courage. I pray for you every morning at sunrise, Lucia read from a later letter, and every evening at sunset. The doctors say I should move to town, where they can treat me better, but how would you find us then? Daniel's old enough now to help with everything. He understands why we must stay. The phone's harsh ring shattered the quiet, making them all jump. Lucia grabbed it, checking the caller ID. It's the sheriff's office. Emily sat up straighter. The DNA results? Lucia's hand shook as she answered. Hello? Yes, this is Lucia Donovan. She listened intently, her face growing pale. Are you absolutely certain? I see. Yes. Thank you for letting me know. She set the phone down carefully, as if it might shatter. Mom? Emily's voice was barely a whisper. What did they say? It's him. Lucia's eyes filled with tears. The DNA confirms it. Those bones we found, it's Jack Turner. He made it back, Emily. He came home to them. But he never reached the town, Emily said, her voice breaking. He never found Eleanor. He was so close. Lucia touched one of the letters gently. All those years she kept faith, and he was trying to return to her. He didn't desert. He didn't abandon them. He died trying to keep his promise. Bruno whined softly, pressing closer against Lucia's leg. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the empty town, carrying echoes of all the years Eleanor had waited, not knowing her beloved lay just beyond reach. The next morning brought another challenge. A certified letter arrived from the county council, its official letterhead stark and forbidding. Lucia read it with growing dismay. "What's wrong?" Emily asked, watching her mother's face. "Back taxes," Lucia said grimly. "Apparently when I bought the ghost town, there were unpaid property taxes from the previous owner. If we don't pay them within 30 days, we'll lose everything, including the right to continue investigating Jack's story." Emily's face fell. "But we can't leave now. We have to clear his name, tell everyone the truth about what happened." "We will," Lucia's jaw set in a determined line. "I'll figure something out. Jack and Eleanor's story deserves to be told. He died a hero, trying to return to his family. Everyone needs to know that." They spent the afternoon gathering Eleanor's letters, organizing them chronologically, building a timeline of hope and heartbreak. The last letter, written just days before her death, was almost too faint to read. "My dearest Jack, I don't have much strength left to write, but I need you to know, every moment of waiting was worth it. Every day I spent believing in you was a gift. If you find these letters someday, remember that my love never wavered. If you don't, then I pray someone else will discover them and know our story. Know that love like ours doesn't die. It echoes through time, touching other hearts, showing them the way home." Night fell over the ghost town, bringing with it a profound quiet. Lucia sat at the table, watching Emily sleep on the narrow cot they'd set up in the cabin's main room. Her daughter's face was peaceful in the lamplight, one hand dangling down to rest on Bruno's fur. The letters lay spread across the table like pieces of a precious puzzle, Eleanor's testament to undying love, her proof that faith could survive any hardship. Bruno's tail thumped softly against the floorboards, his eyes fixed on Lucia with that strange knowing look he sometimes got. Lucia touched the DNA report lying among Eleanor's letters. Somehow they would find the money to save the town. Somehow they would ensure Jack and Eleanor's story wasn't forgotten. Their love deserved to be remembered, to show others that even in the darkest times, hope and faith could light the way home. Bruno shifted slightly, his tail still thumping its gentle rhythm, as if agreeing that there were still more chapters of this story waiting to be told. The fluorescent lights of the county clerk's office buzzed overhead as Lucia and Emily sat at a scratched wooden table, surrounded by stacks of yellowed files. The morning sun barely penetrated the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. Bruno lay at their feet, occasionally sighing as papers rustled above him. "Mom, listen to this," Emily said, her finger trailing along Eleanor's elegant handwriting in one of the journals. "Daniel took his first steps today, right across the schoolroom floor." The other children cheered. "Sometimes I think having them all here helps him feel less lonely without his father." Lucia looked up from the foster care records she'd been examining. "Daniel. That was his name." She shuffled through more papers, her eyes scanning dates and names. "There has to be something here about what happened to him after Eleanor passed." The elderly clerk, Mrs. Martinez, approached their table with another box of files. "Found these in the back storage, all foster placement records from 1965 through 1975. She set the box down with a gentle thud. "Poor Eleanor's boy would have been in there somewhere." "Thank you," Lucia said, already reaching for the first folder. The paper was brittle beneath her fingers as she carefully turned pages, looking for any mention of the Turner family. Emily continued reading from Eleanor's journal. "Daniel asked about his father again today. He's 5 now, old enough to understand that other children have daddies who come home at night. I showed him Jack's picture again, told him how brave his father is, fighting for our country. I pray every day that Jack will return before Daniel grows too old to remember these stories." Lucia's throat tightened. She thought of Jack's remains, found so close to home, and how Eleanor had died never knowing he'd tried to return to them. Their son had lost both parents, one to war and one to death, never knowing the truth of their love story. Here, Lucia's voice cracked with excitement. "I found it. Daniel Turner, age 7, placed into foster care after the death of his mother, Eleanor Turner, in 1972. Her eyes scanned the document quickly. "He was taken in by the Peterson family in Mesa County." Emily leaned over to look. "Does it say what happened to him after that?" Lucia dug deeper into the files, tracing Daniel's path through the system. Each new document revealed another piece of his story. School records, medical forms, changes of address. He stayed with the Petersons until he graduated high school in 1983. Then she paused, studying the next form. "He enlisted in the army, like his father," Emily whispered. Mrs. Martinez, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop, stepped closer. "You know, if he served in the military, the Veterans Affairs Office might be able to help you locate him. They keep pretty good records of their people." Lucia's heart beat faster. Is there a VA office nearby? About 40 miles east. In the county seat, Mrs. Martinez said. I can give you the number. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and computer searches. The VA office was surprisingly helpful once Lucia explained the situation. By early afternoon, she had an address for Daniel Turner, now 73 years old, living just 2 counties over. Should we just drive there? Emily asked as they packed up their research materials. Lucia shook her head. No, this news. It's too big for that. He needs to hear it in a way that gives him time to process it. She pulled out a notepad and began to write, choosing her words carefully. Dear Mr. Turner, my name is Lucia Donovan. My daughter and I recently purchased the ghost town where your mother, Eleanor Turner, once lived. While restoring the property, we discovered something extraordinary, your father's remains, along with letters and journals that tell a story I believe you need to hear. She went on to explain about finding Jack's dog tags, about Eleanor's faithful letters, about the DNA confirmation. She described the journals that revealed Eleanor's deep love for both her husband and her son. When she finished, she read it aloud to Emily, who wiped tears from her eyes. It's perfect, Mom, Emily said softly. Do you think he'll come? I hope so. Lucia sealed the letter carefully. I included my phone number and the address of the ghost town. Now we wait. They spent the rest of the afternoon in Eleanor's old cabin, reading more from her journals, learning about the little boy who had once filled these rooms with laughter. Bruno seemed to sense their anticipation, pacing between the window and door, his ears perking up at every distant sound. As evening approached, Lucia set up their camp stove, trying to keep her hands busy. The beans bubbled in the pot, filling the cabin with their homey smell. Emily sat cross-legged on her sleeping bag, still absorbed in Eleanor's journals. Mom, she said suddenly, listen to this entry. Daniel found Jack's old compass today, the one he left behind when he shipped out. He carries it everywhere now, pretending to navigate like his daddy must be doing in the jungle. Sometimes I catch him whispering to it, asking it to point the way home for his father. Lucia stirred the beans, blinking back tears. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of purple and gold. Bruno suddenly lifted his head, ears forward, tail wagging slowly. In the distance, they heard it, the sound of an engine approaching on the dusty road. Lucia's hand froze on the wooden spoon. Emily scrambled to her feet, pressing her face against the window. The headlights appeared first, cutting through the gathering dusk, illuminating swirls of desert dust. The vehicle, a well-maintained pickup truck, came to a stop outside their cabin. For a moment, nothing moved except the settling dust. Then the driver's door opened slowly. A tall man stepped out, his silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight. He stood straight despite his age, his military bearing evident in his posture. He looked up at the cabin, at the town behind it, his face a map of emotions too complex to read. Bruno whined softly, his tail still wagging. Lucia set down her spoon with trembling hands, and moved toward the door. Emily stood frozen, clutching one of Eleanor's journals to her chest. Daniel Turner had come home at last. Bruno's excited bark shattered the evening stillness. Yet there was no aggression in his stance. His tail wagged in wide, sweeping arcs as he bounded down the cabin steps toward Daniel Turner. The German shepherd circled the elderly veteran, sniffing and whining softly as if welcoming a long-lost friend. Daniel stood motionless, his weathered hands hanging loose at his sides as Bruno investigated him. Well, hello there, boy, he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. When Bruno pressed against his leg, Daniel slowly lowered his hand to scratch behind the dog's ears. Lucia stepped onto the wooden porch, her heart hammering against her ribs. Mr. Turner, I'm Lucia Donovan. This is my daughter, Emily. Her voice wavered slightly as Emily appeared beside her, still clutching Eleanor's journal. Daniel looked up, his eyes glistening in the fading light. You found them? He said simply. You found my parents. Please, come inside. Lucia gestured toward the cabin door. The aroma of cooking beans wafted out into the evening air. We have so much to show you. Inside the cabin, the lantern cast a warm glow across the rough wooden table where Eleanor's journals lay carefully stacked. Jack's dog tags rested on top, the metal catching the light. Daniel's steps faltered when he saw them. Would you like to sit down? Emily asked, quietly, pulling out a chair. Her usual teenage sarcasm had vanished, replaced by a gentle empathy that made Lucia's chest tight with pride. Daniel sank into the chair, his fingers trembling as they reached for the dog tags. I never knew what happened to him, he whispered. All these years, I thought he just didn't want us. Lucia settled across from him while Emily served 3 bowls of beans. Your father came home, Mr. Turner. He made it all the way back here, to her, to you both. Daniel, he corrected softly. Please, call me Daniel. He lifted the dog tags, running his thumb over the embossed letters of his father's name. "Where did you find these?" Emily spoke up, her voice steady. "Bruno led us to them. They were in a leather satchel near the old mine shaft, buried with." She hesitated, glancing at her mother. "With your father's remains," Lucia finished gently. "He was wrapped in an American flag. Daniel, he died trying to come home to you and your mother." A sob caught in Daniel's throat. His shoulders shook as he clutched the dog tags to his chest. Bruno padded over, laying his head on Daniel's knee with a soft whine. "And my mother?" he asked after several long moments. "Her journals?" Lucia slid the topmost journal across the table. "She never stopped loving either of you. She never stopped believing your father would return." She opened the journal to a marked page. "This entry is from your 4th birthday. Would you like to hear it?" Daniel nodded, unable to speak. The lantern flickered as Lucia began to read. "Today my precious boy turned 4 years old. We shared a small cake I managed to bake with our rationed sugar, and Daniel insisted on saving a piece for his daddy. He doesn't understand why Jack isn't here to celebrate with us, but he talks about him constantly. This morning, he pointed to a dust devil spinning across the street and said, 'Look, Mama, Daddy's dancing with the wind.' I held him close and promised that his father loves him very much. I pray every day that Jack will come home to see what a wonderful son he has." Tears streamed down Daniel's face as he reached for the journal with shaking hands. "I don't remember the cake," he whispered, "but I remember her voice, the way she'd sing to me at night." Emily pushed her untouched beans aside and opened another journal. She wrote about that too, about singing "You Are My Sunshine" every night before bed. Daniel's breath caught. Yes, that was our song. They spent hours at that table, reading entries that painted a picture of a mother's devotion and a child's innocence. Daniel absorbed every word, occasionally sharing fragments of memories that the journals brought rushing back. The feel of his mother's hand holding his, as they walked to the schoolhouse, the sound of her laugh when he brought her wildflowers. The night deepened around them, but no one suggested stopping. Bruno remained faithfully by Daniel's side, as if understanding the magnitude of this reunion across time. When morning light began to seep through the cabin windows, Daniel finally looked up from the last journal. His eyes were red but clear. Could we walk through the town? I'd like to see it in daylight." "Of course," Lucia said, standing to stretch her stiff muscles. "Whenever you're ready." They stepped out into the crisp desert morning, Bruno leading the way down the dusty main street. Daniel moved slowly, his gaze sweeping over each building as memories stirred. "The general store," he said, pointing to the weathered structure. "Mr. Henderson used to slip me penny candy when Mama wasn't looking." He smiled faintly. "At least, I think that was his name." They walked on, Daniel pausing frequently to share fragments of childhood memories. Near the schoolhouse, he stopped abruptly. "I remember playing marbles here. Right here in this spot. The dirt was always smooth because so many kids scuffed it with their shoes." Emily knelt and ran her hand through the dust. "I can almost see it," she said. "All those kids playing, your mom watching from the schoolhouse door." They continued their slow journey through the ghost town, each building triggering new recollections. Daniel's voice grew stronger as he shared them, as if each memory was a piece of himself being restored. Near noon, they reached the church. Daniel stood at the bottom of the steps, staring up at the weather-worn cross above the door. The desert wind tugged at his silver hair as tears began to flow freely down his cheeks. "They loved me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "All this time, I thought. But they loved me after all." Bruno pressed against his leg, offering silent comfort as Daniel's tears fell into the desert dust. The sun climbed higher, casting their shadows short and sharp against the church steps, as the son finally found his way home to the truth of his parents' love. They loved me after all. The old church creaked in the desert wind as people filed in, their footsteps echoing on weathered floorboards. Lucia had spent days cleaning, arranging borrowed folding chairs in neat rows. Now, afternoon sunlight streamed through dust-streaked windows, casting long shadows across faces both familiar and new. Daniel stood near the simple wooden podium, his military dress uniform crisp despite the desert heat. Bruno lay quietly at his feet, as if sensing the solemnity of the occasion. Emily helped Lucia pass out programs printed with Jack and Eleanor's photographs, their young faces smiling with hope that had never died. Martha Lee stepped forward first, her voice steady and clear. "We were wrong about Jack Turner," she began, gripping the podium. "For years, whispers painted him as a deserter, a man who abandoned his family. Today, we know the truth. Jack fought his way home through impossible odds, carrying wounds that would eventually claim his life. He died trying to return to Eleanor and their son." Daniel's shoulders straightened as he took Martha's place. My father made it back to American soil, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He struggled through his injuries, growing weaker each day, but he never stopped trying to reach us. He died within sight of this town, of my mother, of me. He didn't desert, he came home. Sheriff Hardy stood next, removing his hat. I owe the Turner family an apology, he admitted. We failed to investigate properly. We let rumors destroy a hero's reputation. Today, we make that right. As the sun began to set, 2 uniformed soldiers stepped forward. They lifted the American flag that had been wrapped around Jack's remains, now carefully cleaned and restored. With precise movements, they folded it into a tight triangle, presenting it to Daniel with silent dignity. The bugler raised his instrument as shadows lengthened across the church floor. The first clear notes of taps rang out across the ghost town, echoing off empty buildings and floating into the desert sky. Emily's hand found Lucia's, squeezing tight as tears rolled down their cheeks. The mournful melody carried on the wind, a long-delayed tribute to a soldier who had finally found his way home. The desert sun painted long shadows across freshly painted buildings as volunteers bustled through the once-abandoned streets. Lucia watched from the newly repaired general store's porch, her heart swelling at the transformation before her. What had been a ghost town just months ago now hummed with purpose and life. "Mom, look what we found," Emily called, waving from where she and 2 local teenagers were carefully mounting a weatherproof display case. Inside, copies of Eleanor's letters and photographs told the story of love that had waited decades to be heard. The town's new name, Turner's Hope, gleamed on a wooden arch at the entrance, the letters carefully carved by Daniel himself. He spent most weekends here now, walking groups of wide-eyed school children through the restored schoolhouse where his mother had taught. His voice would grow soft as he explained how faith and love could survive anything, even time itself. Lucia smiled as she watched Emily direct the younger volunteers. Her daughter had bloomed here, finding strength in helping others understand the town's legacy. The old skepticism had given way to fierce pride in their mission to preserve Jack and Eleanor's story. Fresh paint brightened the weathered buildings, while carefully placed benches invited visitors to sit and reflect. Historical markers dotted the streets, telling the story of a soldier's desperate journey home and a teacher's unwavering faith. What had once felt like a graveyard now stood as a monument to hope and perseverance. As evening approached, Lucia joined Emily and Daniel on the cabin's wide porch. Bruno stretched out at their feet, his head resting protectively on Eleanor's worn journal. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, its light catching the new sign that proclaimed, Turner's Hope, a place where broken dreams had found new life, and where 3 generations had finally found peace in a story of undying love. If today's story echoed in your heart, I hope you'll stick around. Subscribe, and I'll be here again tomorrow with another story that speaks softly but stays deeply.